Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and your podcast co-host. This week, we're discussing an issue that we've followed a lot since the beginning of the year, and that's the tragic Southern California wildfires and the aftermath. You know, we've written a lot and analyzed a lot about the bad policies that sort of led to the conditions that made the wildfire what it was, and also is making it so difficult and expensive for residents to quickly recover. And so, in thinking about this, we wanted to have an inside perspective from someone who was sadly a victim of the wildfires to see what's going on. Are the promises being made by politicians about streamlining bureaucracy and helping recovery come faster, are they being met? Is it what they say it is? And so we're so pleased to have this week as our special guest, Dr. Ed Amos, who's a prominent physician and neurologist who sadly lost his home in the Palisades during the January wildfires. And Ed gives us a first-hand account of kind of what happened on the night of the wildfires and in the days and weeks that have followed. And he shares the experiences of both himself and his neighbors with the various wildfire recovery efforts. I think you'll find it a very interesting and compelling interview. So after the break, please join Rowena and I for our conversation with Dr. Ed Amos. Thanks for listening. We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be on our podcast for what's got to be one of the most devastating things anyone can experience, losing a home in a wildfire. And in your case, the Pacific Palisades wildfire earlier this year. So thank you for recounting your experience with our audience. As public policy researchers, our goal is to learn from your experience and to see where there might be ways to reform our current policies. So Dr. Amos, let's begin with you recounting that terrible night. And when did you know the fire was spreading to your neighborhood, and when were you evacuated?
Well, hello again, Tim and Rowena. Thank you for having me. I was at work that morning. I had gotten up Tuesday morning, January 7th, and gotten up, and as per my usual routine, I had fed the dogs. I had prepared coffee for myself and my wife, had breakfast, read the newspapers, and then it was off to work in Santa Monica, just down the hill. And I was in my office seeing patients all morning. And by the time I went back to my cell phone and looked at it about noon, my wife had been sending me messages that the Palisades was on fire. So I quickly called her, and she said, what are you doing? The Palisades is burning. And I said, well, there's always a fire going on in the Palisades. Oh, no, she said, this is quite different. And so she had then been evacuating my grandchildren who live in the neighborhood, and then went back to our home and was able to save a few things and got in her car and then drove down the hill to West Los Angeles. And it was really gratifying because, you know, the outpouring of just help and kindness from our friends, almost immediately, I was getting calls in the early afternoon from my friends saying, please come stay with us. Please come stay with us. And I kept thinking, well, that's very nice, but I think we'll be okay. And then I realized, no, I think I can't go back up to the Palisades here. And so that was sort of what happened on that day. And it was, the first night was really sort of an emotional roller coaster because we just didn't know what our house survived, what exactly was happening. As you know, there was a lot on the news. There was a lot of information being broadcast, but we still didn't know quite what had happened to our home until probably the next day.
So let's fast forward to that next day and the immediate hours and days afterward. Where did you go? What kind of information did you get from either media or from, officials you were dealing with? What kind of experience did you have at all with, the first responders and the volunteers and others who working in the area? And I think the bigger question, right, is how do you even process beginning to try and pick up the pieces?
Well, so we had relocated, as I mentioned, and accepted the invitation of our very good friends in West LA to stay with them. And they were actually gracious enough also to let us bring our two little dachshunds. And these are people who don't have dogs, and they were very kind and said, no, we want them come along too. So that was very heartwarming, and we felt so loved at that point to be able to be with them. As many people were, we were getting a lot of information from what we were seeing on television, different media sources, and it was not a pretty sight. It was really amazing and really heart-wrenching to see all the fires in different parts of the Palisades, and then of course other parts of Los Angeles. And so I did not have any, nor did my wife really have any direct contact with any first responders other than, I presume, people who were directing traffic in the Palisades, helping people evacuate down the hill. In the days that followed, I was able to talk to our insurance agent, and then he helped out with things so far as how do you get started and how do you make claims. There was a lot online. I'm trying to think of all the different sources. We received so many emails and links to the congressman from our district, from the city councilwoman from our district, et cetera. And they provided a lot of information and a lot of links to resources we could access to be able to start to get things together and sort things out. It was for the first several days, it was a little bit disorienting because it, of course, had never had this happen before. But we quickly got organized and then started to make our plans as to what do we do next.
How long did it take before you were able to go and see what was your home, and what went through your mind as you saw it?
That's a really interesting question, Tim. I did not go back immediately, not because I did not want to, but because I realized the house had burned down. I'd actually seen pictures. They were, there was I guess helicopter or drone footage that was made available quite soon after the fire had been contained. And the reason I didn't go up right away was, number one, I was busy with lots of other things, and but I just didn't want to be up in that area for fear of exposure to toxins. I know there was lots of PPE and all those kinds of things that you could wear to mitigate that, but I just said, you know what? I understand intellectually my house is gone. I've seen a picture of it. So I didn't go back probably, I'm just estimating now, 4 to 6 weeks later, just because I finally said, okay, it's settled down. I want to see what it's like. My wife and our two adult daughters went up within the first few weeks. I think they wanted to sort of see if there was anything left to save, and there really wasn't. And of course, they were, took precautions to make sure they were safe. But it's interesting how different members of the family reacted differently to the need to see the actual aftermath.
One controversy in the aftermath of the fires was that there were reports that the fire hydrants didn't have enough water pressure to put out the fires because a nearby reservoir was in disrepair. What was your experience in your neighborhood in that case?
Well, I don't have any personal knowledge of the fire hydrants in our neighborhood. I do recall my wife telling me that she had talked to other residents who had stayed behind a little longer than we had or she had, and that there really were no firefighters in our little neighborhood, which is called the Villa Bluffs. I'm sure there were other places, and that's about all I know about it. I didn't really have any firsthand knowledge or experience with any of that.
There was a lot of great information coming from elected officials in the area, and other online sources. So in the, hours and days after the fires, do you feel you received the services that you needed and the help that you were looking for and getting your questions answered? And, talking with your hopefully once and future neighbors, what was the experience that they went through?
Well, certainly there was quite a bit of information that was available, and I think it was pretty well organized. There were hyperlinks on websites to access different types of information or resources. And actually, I might say there was so much information that at times it was overwhelming. I mean, there was a lot there, and so we were trying to begin with just basics. Number one, where will we live for the near term? And so that involved looking for rental properties, as you might imagine. And then the next question was, well, what do we do to file an insurance claim? And that was really not from these websites. That was dealing with my insurance agent and later adjuster. And then, what was really amazing and gratifying to me and our whole family was the tremendous outpouring of generosity and kindness. People were offering, obviously, clothing. I mean, I had just the clothes that I was wearing to work left. And the first week there, and they were offering this and that and the other thing. And that was really amazing. And so we found ourselves going to places where there was going to be free tennis shoes or free this or free that. And it was nice until it got a little tiresome. We decided, you know what, we just have to go out and buy regular people clothes and do things. And you realize you need to do that. And, one of the things I learned personally about myself was I learned to accept help. I'm a medical doctor and I tend to help people. That's what I've done my whole career. And don't think of myself as someone who needs any help. And I realized that when someone offers me a new pair of shoes or a jacket or a hat, the correct answer should be, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Not, oh, it's okay. I don't need it. And so that's something which I learned, which was very helpful because I realized people want to help you and they're trying their best in their own way, whether it's public official, it's a friend, it's a cross the street neighbor who's giving you advice about something which you needed right away. Those are my recollections of the first few days, although it is somewhat of a blur now, months later.
Well, it kind of reminds you the famous line from Mr. Rogers really is true, right? Always look for the helpers.
Oh, yes. And I think, what it tells you is people are basically good. They do want to help. And I mean, in these times, I don't have to tell you folks how much tension there is in society right now. But, there are a lot of good people out there who want to help in their own way. And, that to me was one of the real silver linings and the bright spots of the whole experience.
We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week.
So, Dr. Amos, you've decided to rebuild your home. So, that Los Angeles is known for its bureaucracy. How have you begun the rebuilding process? Are you going through a maze of red tape? What's been your experience?
Well, so there was a lot of information out there, but initially it was a little tough to navigate what the best plan was going to be. Initially, as you know, the Army Corps of Engineers was sort of the go-to for the initial debris removal. And ultimately, after some thinking and some discussion, we decided to do it privately, which I think for our purposes and our lot was probably a better fit. Getting that done, we went down, for example, to the Disaster Recovery Center that was there at Pico and Westwood Boulevard, and we found people to be extremely helpful. But I think what happens is when you file a certain request to do this or the other thing, it may take a while to get through the system. And that I think is the only difficulty we've had. And then once the remediation is done, if the people who are doing it don't check all the right boxes, it may get slowed down. But I think what happens is what we've done is you need to sort of stick to it and continue to ask questions and make inquiries and make sure everyone who needs to collaborate to get things done, it does so. And so I tell people, what this whole process is I have another job in addition to my day job. And so it is a bit tedious. Sure, I wish I had someone doing it for me, but I don't. My wife and I are doing it, and it's okay. It's part of what we need to do just to move forward. In general, the process has been pretty good. I would like to think that we could just, as the process goes on, we're going to be submitting, plans for a rebuild, and I would hope it's streamlined and it goes through smoothly. I've not gotten to that point yet. I'm still at the point where we're dealing with getting the final sign off on the debris removal and things like that. I know there's other people who have already started to rebuild, and there's others who are still experiencing some slowdown in their process. I would just hope that process can be streamlined and expedited.
So, Doctor, what are you hearing from your other neighbors? Have they also decided to rebuild? Will you all be together again for the most part?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I unfortunately, I don't think all of our neighbors will rebuild, and there's a lot of reasons. Some people, say, well, look, I'm 80 years old. I don't want to be doing this for the next 5 years. Some, for other reasons, have decided they want to take their young family and be somewhere else because they want a community right there, right now, not years from now. All sorts of different reasons. I think that our neighborhood will be different to some degree. I know there are some of our neighbors and friends who are going to be rebuilding. I think the Palisades will end up recovering well. I just think it'll take some time. There's a lot of community involvement. You probably heard of what they're doing with the Palisades Recreation Center. There's a lot of people supporting that rebuild, and that's a big part of the community because this is where our children grew up, and we did Little League and basketball and all the things you like to think about, the activities your kids take part in. And so I think it will be a different place. Although, it's interesting. I have a patient, and she's in her 80s, and she's from the Palisades, and she and her husband lost their house. And I believe her husband is even older than she is, maybe about 90 or so. And she tells me, we were talking about just this subject, and she said, yep. She says, my husband, I can't wait to start our rebuild. And I thought, God love you for that, right? So there's a whole spectrum of people, and it's really, it'll be interesting to see how it all ends up.
One of the initial things that we all saw from afar about the rebuilding process, there was the big move of getting the debris removed from your home site. Did you have any experience with that? Were you able to do it quickly? Have you done it yet? And, what's been the experience of your neighbors too?
Right. And that's what I was mentioning is the debris removal is the very first thing you got to go through to get going if you're going to rebuild. And actually, it's mandatory that you do it because they want to make sure all the waste and whatnot has been removed from the area. And so, as I mentioned, we initially thought we might have the Army Corps of Engineers do it. And then we realized we had some special things that needed to be done to our property to do it correctly. And so we interviewed, various contractors and found one who seemed to be able to do a good job for us. And we went that way. It wasn't difficult to get the permits to actually do that. I think it's the final sign off I was mentioning that you got to make sure that all the boxes are checked. And I understand the reason for them. And sometimes there's a little slowdown, if the system seems a little bit overwhelmed, if you will, meaning the inspectors have a lot to do. But I think we'll get there. We are getting there, and that should be done soon.
Along those lines, and your medical expertise could be come into play on this next question. I have a friend of mine who lives in Calabasas, that neck of the wood, and I know there's been a big issue, right, about where do you put the debris, and the people kind of living near the landfills and areas where you would put the debris. They've had these concerns, that you've expressed earlier about wanting to go see the home site, right, about the toxicity and all of that. Kind of in your view, and certainly from a medical perspective, you're not a landfill expert, certainly, but what should we be keeping in mind of, we're balancing, right, that we want to move fast, we want to get it cleared, we want to get rebuilding started, but hey, there's some gnarly stuff, especially in carpeting, right, that are in building materials used in home that, there are some toxic issues that we have to deal with here.
Well, certainly, I think, the proper handling of the debris and the toxins is very, very important. And you're correct. I'm not an expert in that area, but I think the number one thing is to protect yourself when you're in areas where it still exists, which is why the people who went up in those areas were wearing masks and protective coverings and whatnot. And then the question as to what do you do with all the debris? Well, I think it needs to be safely transported, and then it needs to be placed somewhere where it's not going to cause future problems. And I understand what you're asking. It's hard to know where that should be and what the best policy for that would be. Meaning it should be, I think, somewhere where it's safe. It's not going to cause problems. And gosh, I would be hopeful that there are people who know much more than I do about that process, who could advise those who are making the decisions to give them correct and accurate information as to what should be done. I'm not sure what the final outcome of that process would be. I do know it's being hauled away, and actually, I'm not sure exactly where it's all going. Which I'm sure that information exists. I think you mentioned it. Maybe it's out near Calabasas. But it's an important public issue, I think. And I think that it's something which the people who are living nearby, wherever these sites are, should be informed, I think, as to what is going in there and what there is being done to make sure they're safe. I mean, I guess if you think back, there are so many examples, I think, that we've seen over time where there's a toxic site and people living nearby have possibly health issues in the future or whatnot. And, whether it's gas or toxins or anything else that has been there that is leaking, I don't know how you can avoid exposure unless you have these locations away from where the public is. And that's something which I'm not sure what the policy on that is.
And of course, you have to do it right, because you see so many areas. We have our rail yards here in Sacramento where it's taken them decades to do the cleanup with all the chemicals and things over there. To have it be an area you could redevelop, you have to do it right. So you don't have this 100 years from now. We have to do a 20-year cleanup of where we put the debris.
Well, yeah, I think it's a matter of good planning. And that's really the issue, right? Is if you decide you're going to have some place where you're going to, whether it's going to be dumping waste products from just day-to-day life or after a fire or something else, then the question is, okay, if that's the best technique to get rid of that material, then should it be in an area that's contained, that's not going to be near where people build houses or go to work or go to school? Right. And the problem then becomes, what if the city grows out to where that toxic dump site is? People want to build next to it. I think people have to decide, should that be permitted? I mean, it's a lot like the question of, fire prevention. We're building, society builds cities and civilization right up to where the fire risk is, whether it's brush or forest. So do we have a buffer zone? Should that be in the Palisades? Should people be allowed to build right up to where the trailheads are, right up to where the fire might start, right? These are questions that have to be discussed and decided upon. I think society has to ask itself, what do we want? How do you prevent fires? And should we have mandates that say, no, sorry, quarter-mile buffer zone or something like that? I don't know the answer, but I don't know that we've been discussing that enough.
We'll get back to our terrific interview in just a moment, but first, PRI's YouTube channel is must watch. By visiting youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, you can watch webinars, videos, and other original content, including our new Free City Center video tours and interviews. You can watch as PRI's Wayne Weingarten tours Dignity Moves, a San Francisco nonprofit that is reimagining scalable solutions to homelessness with founder and CEO Elizabeth Funk. And you can check out Stephen Greenhut's tour of a proposed new city in rural Solano County that has generated significant interest and intrigue. You can even listen to previous episodes of Next Round Podcast. So visit PRI's YouTube channel today at youtube.com/Pacific Research 1, that's the number 1, and click the subscribe button to receive notifications about our latest content as soon as it's posted.
On another practical matter, that we have an insurance crisis in the state with insurance premiums shooting up for homeowners and for drivers alike. Was your insurance able to deliver the funds you needed in a timely manner so that you are ready to rebuild? And do you expect your insurance to rise?
So we have good insurance, which we're very grateful for, and it has done very well by us so far. It's still a bit of a negotiation, as you might imagine, as to the exact replacement value of our home, the contents of our home, things like that. But up till now, they have been very helpful, and I think that's good. I anticipated there'd be a bit of a negotiation, and so I've learned a lot about insurance policies. I've learned a lot about how the process goes, having never really never even looked carefully at my homeowner's policy, which seems crazy, right? But it's true. But now I know all about it. And now I've read through it. I've consulted a lot of resources. And so it's a process. I'm a very patient person. It's going to take some time to get this all sorted out. But I think we're going to be okay in the end. I think to your other question regarding the greater problem of insurance, my gosh, it is really a problem. And I'm not an expert in insurance or economics, but I think what we need to do as a society, or maybe just in this state as Californians or the entire United States, is say, look, we need to have some sort of better plan than we have now. As you know, there's this state-run fund, the FAIR Plan, which some people by default had to purchase because they could no longer get private insurance, right? And I understand there's opinions on both sides about should we have to underwrite the insurance if there's these big losses? Should we be granted increases in our premiums? It's a complicated problem, and there's a lot of people on both sides of it. There's the public. There's who pay the rates, who pay the premiums. There's the insurance industry. There's the legislators and the regulators. It's not a simple answer, but I think what I would hope for, what I would wish for, would be that everyone would, in good faith, come to the table and say, look, we just need to solve this. We don't mind private industry underwriting these things, but if you're going to write the policies, stick with it. Don't abandon the insured, right? And, I don't know how you do this, how one does this so that everyone is happy. Maybe everyone will be partially happy with the result, but I think it has to be more predictable and more reliable. Those are the words I would think of. If I realize if I live in a high risk area where there's a risk of fire, I understand I'm going to pay higher premiums, but I don't want to have to worry that year to year I'm going to be canceled, right? Then on the other hand do those insurance companies that are underwriting the policies, are they able to collect enough money to pay claims, right? And again, I'm simplifying something which is very complicated, but what I would hope for as a citizen and an insured is that somehow people really, meaning our officials, our government officials, private industry, come together and let's just get it right. I don't know what that means exactly, but right now it's sort of a mess.
So, and I always say when the topic of the mayor comes up that I know her a little bit from her time as Assembly Speaker in Sacramento, and she is a lovely person, but, she's received deservedly a lot of criticism for being in Ghana during the wildfires, but a lot of time has passed since that day. How do you think she's done after the wildfires and, her stated goals of streamlining permits and cutting red tape and helping you and your neighbors, get back to your homes in a more normal life?
Well, that's a complicated question. I don't know Karen Bass, and I'm sure she is a very nice person. She appears that way when she's interviewed publicly. I know she's an experienced politician. I think that she and the other people involved, the city council and the supervisors, should really all be on the same page somehow and continue to work with us, meaning the people who've lost homes and whatnot, to be able to streamline things. As one example, and I don't know what the ultimate outcome will be of this, but here's a small example. I think she's announced publicly that they are going to place underground all the electrical and other kinds of wires, if you will, that were on the phone poles, because that's one of the risks when you're in a fire zone to having problems. And just a few weeks ago, the phone poles were put back on my street. I don't know if those are temporary phone poles, but they're in the same location they were when my house was there. And I understand to underground all the electrical is time consuming and costly and maybe requires opening up the streets when streets need to be clear for, construction traffic to be there. So I've thought about this, but I'm not sure where it's going. And I think one thing I would hope for is that, and this goes back to one of your earlier questions, if someone like me has a question like what we're talking about right now, oh my gosh, are the phone lines going to be underground? They said they were, but look, they brought back our poles. Call a number, look at a website. Here's an answer. Those are just temporary. Don't worry, sir. We're going to do it anyway. But see, I have no access to that information. I don't know. And then, of course, what happens, as so many things in life, there's rumors. People say this or they say that, or who knows. And so these are the kind of things, small things, that I really wish there'd be better communication to the public. Now, again, it could just be me not reading the right websites, right? But I wish it was easy to get information. And I know they do have town halls and all these kinds of things, but I don't know that we all, or at least I, feel like I get answers to these things as they come to my mind. And again, nothing's an emergency. It's all something which, I'm sure will be in due time, we'll see the answer to. But I guess I would hope everyone would be a little bit more good about telling us when there are changes, or, what, we said something, we're not sure about it now. I'm sorry, we have to make different plan. And that's just one small example. I'm sure there are 100 others, but that's just one that came to my mind.
To follow up on that, Dr. Amos, do you have any recommendations for the governor and Mayor Bass? If you were king of California for a day, what would you change so that the state can mitigate the spread of these wildfires?
Well, as I said earlier, I think one of the most important things is prevention, and whether you're talking about wildfires or you're talking about illnesses, diseases. And so I would say the government and private groups should get together and say, what are the known ways to prevent these kinds of urban fires? And we talked about one of them earlier. What about some sort of regulation as to how close one can build a structure to where there's potential for fire to start, the brush, the forest, whatnot? That to me would be number one. It's so easy, right? Because if you think about the Palisades fire, my understanding is it was a brush fire way up in the Temescal Canyon that reignited unexpectedly after initially being put out. And I guess there were enough homes and buildings nearby that eventually it spread to them and it spread down the canyon. That would be something which I would think would be rather straightforward. I realize some people might have to give up their homes and maybe the state would have to, or the city would have to buy those, but that would be a good step. And then the question would be, what about the way we build the home? Building materials, building codes. I think we've come a long way with earthquakes over the years. Structures are much more strong now and resistant to earthquakes than they were, say, 30, 40 years ago. And that probably is being done, but I'm just not aware of it. But I think prevention is the number one thing I would hope for. That would be my one first wish. I don't know what else I would do is if I were in charge of the entire state, but I would try to make sure people got information in a reliable way, like I said earlier, regarding questions they had. And, I think there's so many little details that we could talk about, but I think it's a matter of helping people to return to their homes, to get their homes built again. Many people actually probably could use some help financially. I have a son and daughter-in-law who lost their home in the Pacific Palisades, and I know they're going to rebuild, but it's a bigger challenge to them. And I would be hopeful that maybe there would be government loans or low-interest loans that could help people who need help with that part of the recovery process.
Well, finally, as we close, we call our podcast Next Round because we love nothing more than to discuss public policy over a great glass of California wine. And I think our listeners would forgive you and your neighbors for maybe wanting to enjoy a glass of something with all that you've been going through as of late. So for a lighter moment in a very serious discussion, what's a favorite beer or wine or cocktail or other beverage that you're enjoying and would recommend to our listeners to maybe take their minds off the arduous rebuilding process, hopefully not too arduous, that lies ahead?
Well, what's interesting, I enjoy drinking beer as well as other things. And I discovered a non-alcoholic beer about a year ago made by a company called The Athletic. And they make several versions. They make an IPA, they make a Pilsner, they even make a Mexican lager. And, without sounding like I'm a representative for the company, because I don't know them, it's wonderful. And, what's nice about it is you can drink them and not worry about it because it's not alcoholic. It's okay. And I found after getting used to them, then when I actually pull out one of my favorite daily beers, I actually preferred the Athletic to the real beer, which was surprising to me. But I would encourage people to try that out. It's quite good.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amos. This was a wonderful interview, and thank you for taking the time out to chat with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.